Imagine finding yourself one step away from the end. Everything around you loses meaning. The past, so dear to you, offers a precious, though not sufficient consolation, inevitably destined to run out too soon. In those brief moments that separate you from the non-existence, you contemplate the years that have passed, the experience that you've lived, the lovers you've lost, and the choices you've not made. If only you could go back for a few moments and change things. How many countless other roads you could have taken. How many words you could have the courage to say. And how many precious moments you could value. Alas, it is too late now. There is no more time. Your life is ending, and the eternal nothingness awaits you. Imagine, however, of not being alone in this. Your love is with you, which, now that you think about it, makes everything so much more difficult and heartbreaking. There is no time for this. The little you had is almost over. Now imagine yourself tasting your own tears on your cheeks, while a sigh filled with resignation exhales from your mouths. You're scared and not ready, but at least there is time for one last moment of life. Imagine feeling the warmth of your lover's breath while your trembling lips touch each other helplessly in a last, fleeting attempt to escape your destiny. Imagine, however, that waiting for you there is not the usual soft and sweet lips that you would recognize amongst thousands, but the bitter taste of unspeakable lies. Imagine feeling pierced as if by a dagger that burns like ice, and then you would hear her voice, sneaky and unknown, whispering like a sentence in your ear. The words you hear are as sharp as a sword and as cold as metal. They are alien words, as well as the being who pronounces them.
For the glory of new Phyrexia.
What you have just heard could be defined as the epilogue of this sad story, the finale of a journey that lasted many lives and shaped many worlds. But to fully understand it, we will have to go back to time immemorial and take a closer look at the life of a young boy on the plane of Ren. Jace Beleren was his name, and Silmot's Crossing his birthplace. From the earliest years of his life, it was clear to everyone that the young Jace possessed a very rare gift: telepathy. In order to educate the young boy and direct his talents, Jace's father took him to Amonkhet, the local sphinx-shaped sorcerer who acted as an impartial arbiter between the two local factions engaged in a civil war, the Amphren and the Trovians. Amonkhet agreed to take the young Jace, who was just 13 at the time, and mentor him. Under his master's guidance, Jace spent years studying new and increasingly complex magic, as well as honing his telepathic talents. For the first time in his short life, the boy felt like he belonged somewhere and that he was truly appreciated by someone. But alas, all this could not last for too long. After just 2 years of training, Amonkhet began giving his young apprentice spying duties. Jace had to sneak into both factions' camps and gather military intelligence to report back to his master. During one of his missions, Jace tried, as he usually did from time to time, up to now without ever being successful, to penetrate the mind of Amonkhet. Only this time, Jace succeeded. And in breaching his mentor's mind, the young wizard discovered a shocking truth about his own past. Several months earlier, the primal energy of an otherworldly spark had awakened within him. It had showed him the hidden truth of a multiverse composed of an infinite number of planes of existence. Jace was one of the legendary Planeswalkers, mythological creatures capable, or so the ancient tales told, of walking through the blind eternities that separated the various worlds. As if this wasn't enough, Amonkhet, his master, the closest thing Jace had to a father, knew everything. And not only had the Sphinx kept the truth from his pupil, but he had also repeatedly erased his memory whenever they would come back. In addition to that, it was later revealed that Amonkhet was in fact manipulating the two warring factions of Rin by secretly providing intelligence to both of them. This, in turn, allowed him to keep the tide of the conflict unchanged, enriching himself from the sale of information while preserving his status as an impartial arbiter in the eyes of all. With Amonkhet's terrible nature revealed, Jace challenged his master to a telepathic duel. The two wizards fought for days, but eventually, at the cost of much of his sanity and memories, Jace disintegrated his master's mind, rendering him unable to breathe. The extreme effort, both physical but above all emotional and mental, that this duel required of Jace was too great to bear and caused the reignition of his Planeswalker spark. The mentalist lost consciousness during the walking and, unaware of what had just happened, he awoke in the marvelous streets of the plain-wide city of Ravnica. Over time, Jace settled down on Ravnica. The wizard enriched himself in unorthodox ways and led a comfortable life for some time. His main source of income was from penetrating the minds of local noble lords to discover their secrets and subsequently extort money from them in exchange for his silence. During one of his jobs, Jace was approached by the leader of an interplanar merchant organization who was interested in offering Jace a business partnership. The organization was called the Infinite Consortium, and its leader, Tezzeret. After an initial moment of hesitation, Jace agreed to collaborate with Tezzeret, putting his telepathic skills at the disposal of the consortium. In the years that followed, Jace held various jobs for the consortium, always accompanied and aided by his partner and friend Kaladesh, a blade master originally from Ravnica. Notably, during his first year of service, Jace recovered an encrypted scroll called the Dragon Scroll, which the pyromancer planeswalker Chandra Nalaar had earlier stolen from the Sanctum of Stars in Kefalai. Keep in mind this information as it will come in handy later. Soon, however, the cruelty and total lack of scruples that characterized the work of the consortium made the mentalist come to his senses, and he began to feel remorse for his actions. The situation got even worse when, following the failure of a mission entrusted to him directly by Tezzeret, Jace was tortured and savagely beaten by the Esperite Artificer. But Jace's problems had just begun. A short time later, Tezzeret was summoned by the all-powerful Nicol Bolas, the original founder of the consortium, to settle a mining dispute over an unknown plane. The Artificer, suspicious of this summon and distrustful of Bolas, decided to take Jace with him, entrusting the mentalist with the task of staying alert and possibly prepared to defend both of them from an hypothetical mental attack by the dragon. The meeting eventually took place, and Bolas attempted indeed to penetrate the minds of the two men. Jace tried in vain to resist and was miserably destroyed. But again, this was only the first of his problems, because eventually the two men managed to escape, and the wrath of the cruel Tezzeret was not slow to pour on Jace, who was tortured for weeks for failing in the task assigned to him. Finally, the real breaking point came when Jace refused to carry out entirely a new task given to him by Tezzeret. Outraged, Tezzeret reasoned that the mentalist was no longer a useful asset to the consortium and, as such, it should have been eliminated. Almost instantaneously, all consortium forces were deployed with a single task: to find and kill Jace Beleren. Frightened and panicked, Jace did what any other man or woman would do. He took his only friend Kaladesh with him and fled to the farthest reaches of Ravnica in an attempt to lose the consortium spies. During their travels, the two came across the seductive and beautiful necromancer Liliana Vess, with whom Jace eventually had a torrid affair. Later, unbeknownst to Jace and manipulated by Nicol Bolas himself, Liliana betrayed her lover and revealed Jace and Kaladesh's hiding place to Tezzeret. In the battle that ensued, Jace narrowly escaped with his life, while his partner and only friend Kaladesh died. 6 months later, Liliana tracked down the Mentalist once more and urged him to engineer his revenge against Tezzeret so as to finally be free from him and avenge the poor Kaladesh in the process. What followed was a long period of Jace and Tezzeret plotting to kill each other. On one side, Tezzeret was not willing to tolerate the insubordination and impudence of an arrogant brat unable to do what he was told, while Jace just wanted to finally be free of Tezzeret and the consortium. Finally, Jace, always supported and advised by Liliana, decided to launch a decisive attack against Tezzeret's base. Unfortunately, nothing went as planned that day. The attack failed, Jace was imprisoned, and Liliana's betrayal came to light. In the months that followed, Jace endured unspeakable torment and endless torture as Tezzeret struggled to construct an artifact which was capable of controlling his prisoner's mind without harming his psychic abilities. One day, against all odds, Jace was approached in his cell by Liliana Vess, who desperately tried to explain the reasons for her actions to her beloved. The necromancer's heart was sincere, and to prove it, she helped the Mentalist escape from the terrible prison in which Tezzeret had confined him. Finally, Jace and Tezzeret met one last time on the battlefield. This time, however, Jace managed to get the upper hand of the Esperite Planeswalker and eradicated all memories from Tezzeret's mind, thus leaving the consortium leaderless and doomed to fall. Shortly thereafter, Jace, in an attempt to thank Liliana for helping him in defeating Tezzeret once and for all, vowed to help her in any way that he could. Hello you guys, sorry for the interruption. This is just a super quick break to tell you that this episode was entirely funded and made possible by those of you who have decided to join me and my Patreon page. So thank you all so much who have decided to do so. And to those of you who still have not done so, please consider having a look. Maybe there's something there you might be interested into. And also you'll be supporting me and my content directly. Thank you all so much for even taking the time to look at it. Now I'll gladly leave you to the rest of the video and I'll see you at the end. Three years after retrieving the Dragon Scroll from Chandra, Jace was finally able to decipher parts of it, identifying the location referred to in the text as the Plane of Zendikar. Eager to learn more and drawn by the sense that an ancient power lurked within the scroll, Jace journeyed to Zendikar, and there he followed in Chandra's footsteps into an hidden cavern deep within the continent of Akum. To his extreme surprise, Jace found Chandra herself within the cave, battling a huge red dragon. Instinctively, Jace tried to help the pyromancer, but to no avail. Soon, the Mentalist noticed that his magic was being absorbed by a giant floating hedron in the center of the cave. Jace then, drawing on what little he had managed to decipher from the scroll, yelled at Chandra to create a fire that could not be seen. By using this ancient yet mysterious power, the two were able to defeat the dragon, which was none other than the Tarkirian planeswalker Sarkhan Vol, before passing out themselves. When he woke up, Jace wondered why the three planeswalkers had found themselves in this very cave and at this precise moment. Growingly suspicious that something, or someone, had manipulated their actions and paths, Jace left the cave with the intention of informing the sages of the Seagate of Olimar on the Tazim continent of Zendikar of what had happened. Very soon, however, Jace realized that something had profoundly changed on Zendikar. Despite his complete ignorance of the plane, he could still feel it in the magical vibrations around him. His suspicions were finally confirmed when the Mentalist was attacked by a huge and monstrous alien being. Jace was able to defeat his terrifying foe, and 2 weeks later, the wizard arrived at the lighthouse of Olimar, where he learned parts of the ancient history of the primal world-eating monsters known as the Eldrazi, and reported what had happened at Akum. After that, feeling no need to further his knowledge of the Eldrazi, but rather interested in learning more about the Dragon Scroll, Jace left Zendikar, promising the sages and archivists of Alimar that he would have returned if he had discovered any valuable information on these otherworldly beings. After the turmoil of recent years, Jace decided to allow himself a time of wandering, neglecting his past obligations and finally returning to the plane that had initially welcomed him after his first planeswalk, Ravnica. However, after some mysterious symbols began to appear throughout the 10th district of the immense plain-wide city, Jace became entangled in the complex webs of internal feuds that governed the relations between the 10 guilds among which Ravnica was divided. In the months that followed, Jace befriended the Celestian Health Priestess Imara, navigated the deceptions of the Dimir Guildmaster Lazav, endured the judgment of the Azorius Guildmaster Lavinia, fought a deadly duel with the Izzet Guildmaster Ral Zarek, and discovered the great truth about the implicit maze and the supreme verdict. In the final stages of the events of the Return to Ravnica block, Jace played a fundamental role in the fate of the entire plane, saving the fortunes of the 10 guilds and the lives of countless people. As a result of this, Jace was declared the new Living Guild Pact, or the living mediator tasked with understanding and accommodating the perspectives of each of Ravnica's 10 guilds in order to maintain and ensure peace on the plane. In the years that followed, Jace continued to explore the vast multiverse, moved by his thirst for knowledge, but often his duties as the Living Guild Pact called him back on Ravnica. One day, on one of these occasions, Jace clashed with the Gorgon planeswalker Rashka, whose aim was to subdue the Great Mentalist and thus have direct influence over the 10 guilds. Jace defeated Rashka without much trouble, but one thing in particular that the Gorgons said during their fight planted the root of a terrible doubt in the Great Mage's mind. Entrusting Lavinia of the Azorius Syndicate in his absence, the Living Guild Pact Jace Beleren set out to find more information about what had happened to the planeswalker Garruk Wildspeaker.
You don't know what's become of him, do you? Never mind. I'm sure you already failed him as well. You're a plague, Beleren, a scourge to all those you claim to protect. Declaring your loyalty to me will be the first favor you do to this world.
While investigating Rashka's ominous warning, Jace discovered that Garruk's soul had been corrupted by an ancient artifact imbued with demonic power. Over time, the curse that had befallen the hunter had greatly worsened, and now, more bloodthirsty monster the reasonable man, Garruk was on his way to the plane of Shandalar to fulfill an age-old Onake prophecy which said that the bearer of this curse would be transformed into a demon by the name of World Slayer. Not only did the Living Guild Pact discover that the fulfillment of this prophecy would spell the destruction of the entire plane of Shandalar, but the birth of the World Slayer would have undoubtedly posed a dire threat to the entire multiverse, including Ravnica. Resolved not to risk the safety of his own plane, Jace hunted down the planeswalker Ob Nixilis on the plane of Zendikar, from whose head he retrieved a hedron capable of suppressing its bearer's demonic powers. With the Mystic Stone recovered, Jace made his way to Shandalar, where he patiently awaited Garruk's arrival. The two planeswalkers engaged in a titanic battle, which ended up destroying much of their surroundings. Eventually, Jace was able to implant the hedron in Garruk's head and stop the curse of the Chain Veil from taking effect. Back on Ravnica, Jace was approached by a proud planeswalker of Theros named Gideon Jura, who was engaged, along with other worthy planeswalkers and warriors, in a foolish resistance against the Eldrazi on Zendikar. Gideon had determined that the hedrons scattered across Zendikar exerted some form of influence over the Eldrazi broods as they were connected to the plane's ley lines. Precisely for this reason, after realizing that he could not win the battle for Zendikar alone, Gideon had decided to turn to the master of the ley lines himself, the Living Guild Pact, Jace Beleren. Feeling partly responsible for the fate Zendikar was being subjected to, Jace decided to accept the proposition and followed Gideon Jura through the Blind Eternities. After trying in vain to recruit the pyromancer Chandra Nalar, Jace and Gideon walked to Zendikar, where they found out that the capital city of Seagate, which was one of the most important commercial and cultural center of the entire plane of Zendikar, had fallen to the destruction of the Eldrazi. Along with Jori-En, a Zendikari merfolk friend of Gideon, Jace was able to figure out that the hidden cavern deep in the plane's vacuum where it all supposedly began, and which went by the name of the Eye of Ugin, was none other than the epicenter of all ley lines that traversed the plane of Zendikar. For this reason, it was reasonable to think that the place possessed a much greater importance than Gideon, Jori-En, or Jace himself could have imagined. Resolute, Jace and Jori-En decided to head to the Eye to investigate. Halfway there, however, the duo stumbled upon one of the three great Eldrazi titans, Ulamog. Jace and Jori barely escaped the destructive fury of the Infinite Gyre and decided to part ways. Jace would continue on to the Eye, while Jori would return to Gideon to warn everyone of the impending doom. Once he arrived at his destination, Jace found Hugin himself, intent in rebuilding the interior of the chamber as well as the Hedron's network, which had both collapsed during the clash between Jace, Chandra, and Sarkhan. After welcoming him inside the underground chamber, the spirit dragon revealed to the mentalist how the Hedron network could be exploited to re-imprison the Eldrazi on the plane of Zendikar, thus preventing further damage to the various planes of the multiverse. The Living Guild Pact, however, astute and wise as always, immediately realized that the same principle could have been used to kill the three great titans rather than imprisoning them again. Heedless of Ugin's warning to refrain from such folly, Jace immediately set off again to Seagate to share the new invaluable information with his friend and brother-in-arms Gideon. Shortly after arriving at Seagate and reporting what he had learned, the city, or what was left of it, was again attacked by Ulamog. This time, however, armed with new insights into the functioning of the Hedron network and also aided by the Planeswalkers Chandra Nalar and Nissa Ravain, who in the meantime had come to Zendikar to offer their help in repelling the Eldrazi advance, Gideon and Jace managed to survive and repel the attack by Ulamog, Kozilek, and Ob Nixilis, who had meanwhile sided alongside the Eldrazi. If there was one lesson that Jace, Gideon, Chandra, and Nissa learned from their confrontation with Ulamog and Kozilek, it was the realization that they were nowhere near as strong as they thought they were. On the contrary, they felt weak, insignificant, and irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. This had to change. Too many threats were taking shape across the various planes, and the multiverse was unable to defend itself. Somebody had to keep watch. A handful of brave heroes would have to take responsibility for watching over the multiverse and give their lives to ensure its peace and survival if need be. The four Planeswalkers solemnly swore to join their forces, even if it was the last thing they would do in their lives, in defense of this cause. The legendary Gatewatch were born out of this oath, and they were immediately confronted with one of the worst threats that the multiverse had ever faced. The three titans had to be stopped. Realizing that the fate of the multiverse had to come before the Spirit Dragon's wish to spare the Eldrazi's lives, Jace resolved to neutralize the immense World Eaters by killing them with the help of his companions and a local merfolk Planeswalker. Soon, the self-appointed defenders of the multiverse found themselves in the battlefield against the titans Ulamog and Kozilek. What followed was a battle of epic proportions. At first, the Gatewatch magic had proved nearly useless against the Old Ones. However, leveraging Zendikar's Leyline's networks, the Valiant Walkers were able to channel the destructive power of Chandra's pyromantic magic through the green magic of Nissa Ravain. Now, with no strength left in their bodies and ready for the end, the Gatewatch managed to launch a last, desperate attack against Ulamog and Kozilek. In a brilliant blaze of blinding stellar energy, both titans were incinerated and destroyed, leaving behind a thick blanket of ash that covered the entire surface of Zendikar like an endless mist. There was a third titan, however, that was missing from the count. Emrakul had vanished, summoned to the endless depths of the blind eternities by an echo from a distant world. After defeating Ulamog and Kozilek, Jace set out in search of the vampire planeswalker Sorin Markov. His millennial experience and deep knowledge of the multiverse, the Mentalist reasoned, would have been an incredible asset to the Gatewatch mission. For months on end, Jace tried to track down Sorin without success. First asking for the help of Liliana Vess, who, however, could not or did not want to help him, then following the cryptic indications hidden inside Tamiyo's diary, which the Mentalist had recovered from an inspection in Markov Manor. Finally, during the final stages of the Shadows on the Innistrad block, Jace and Tamiyo witnessed powerless the arrival of the third great Eldrazi Titan. Emrakul, the Iron Storm, who had been drawn to the plane of Innistrad by the Lithomancer planeswalker Nahiri, now stood before them. Nahiri, on her part, had summoned Emrakul to enact her revenge on Sorin Markov's betrayal. Immediately, Jace recognized the gravity of the situation and ran to call the rest of the Gatewatch. After all, they had succeeded in disintegrating Ulamog and Kozilek on Zendikar, so certainly they could have contained Emrakul's fury as well. Unfortunately, this was not the case. Innistrad's ley lines were already synchronized with cryptoliths created by the planeswalker Nahiri to lure Emrakul to the plane, and as such, they could not be used as a conduit for Chandra's pyromancy, as was done on Zendikar. Unable to think of an alternative plan that could turn the tables, the Gatewatch found themselves overwhelmed by a host of Eldrazi monsters. And although each of them would have fought until their last breath, this battle was not one they could win. When all hope seemed to be lost, however, and every light seemed to have gone out, help came from the one who alone had the power to change the tide of this battle. Liliana Vess, the cursed necromancer of Dominaria, unleashed a huge army of undead against the Eldrazi ancient monster. This, of course, wasn't enough to kill the Titan, but it bought the Gatewatch enough time to regroup and join the counterattack. Jace's job was to protect everyone in the group from Emrakul's mental assaults. Gideon and Chandra were tasked with holding off the hordes of the Eldrazi spawn by slowing them as much as possible, while Nissa and Tamiyo managed in a last titanic effort to combine their forces and imprison the weakened Titan on the moon of Innistrad. The Eldrazi had finally been defeated. Catastrophe had been avoided. Or had it? Because shortly after completing the spell that had imprisoned Emrakul on the moon, Tamiyo revealed to Jace that she had not been able to resist the mind control of the beast in the last seconds before casting the spell. Thus, the formula she had used to complete the binding spell was not the one she should have used. It was different. It was unknown. Emrakul herself had provided it to Tamiyo. Did the beast want to be imprisoned? It didn't make any sense. What if the cunning Titan had tricked them all though, and this was just part of a bigger and far more frightening plan? Was such a thing really possible? The Eldrazi were supposed to be eaters of worlds, those who ensure the perpetuation of a natural cycle of things, life and death. Could they be even able to hatch plans beyond that? Have aspirations? Maybe even feelings? There was no way to know now. Emrakul had been imprisoned. The end had been thwarted, and that's what mattered. But for how long? Deeply upset by this realization, Jace and Tamiyo parted ways, and Jace pondered for a long time what might be Emrakul's grand plan. For the 3 months that followed, Jace returned to Ravnica. His mansion became the headquarters of the Gatewatch, and the Planeswalkers enjoyed a period of relative peace. One day, Thanks to Tamiyo's intercession, the Gatewatch received a visit from an emissary of the consulate of Kaladesh, the Vedalken Dovin Ban. The consulate was the all-present body that governed the plain of Kaladesh and its capital city, Giripur. Repression, corruption, and violence were no strangers to the work of the consulate and its henchmen. Because of this, the situation in Kaladesh was complicated to say the least, with groups of rebels systematically refusing to bow to the will of the governmental authority, organizing acts of active resistance, and in some cases even fomenting violent civilian uprisings. Dovin Ban had come to the Gatewatch with a proposition from his superiors. The consuls were interested in hiring the Gatewatch to ensure security and public order during the Inventors' Fair, which was supposed to be held in the capital city of Giripur. The Vedalken Planeswalker, however, barely had the time to communicate the reason for his visit when Liliana Vess kicked him out, yelling that the Gatewatch's mission was to protect the multiverse from other Planeswalkers and far worse interplanar threats and not act as vigilante mercenaries. As if that weren't enough, a much more urgent matter required the full attention of the Gatewatch. Several instances of Azorius' Senate being found petrified on the streets of Ravnica had led Jace and his companions to believe, with reasonable certainty, that Rashka of the House Golgari had returned to the plane. However, as Jace set out to track down the Gorgon Planeswalker, Liliana informed him that, during a reconnaissance on Kaladesh, she had seen Tezzeret alive and well with her own eyes. In that moment, something clicked in Jace's mind. Tezzeret. How could he be alive? Jace couldn't allow it. He felt much stronger now. The cruel artificer would have had no chance against him. It was a different Jace now, and he, this time, would not be so merciful as to spare Tezzeret's life again. This time, he would get the job done. Jace immediately tracked down Gideon and the two set off together for Kaladesh, where they would join Liliana and Chandra. The members of the Gatewatch arrived on Kaladesh just in time to intervene in the duel between Tezzeret and Pia Nalar, who was Chandra's mother and leader of the Giripur resistance against the consulate's tyranny. Aided by their newest member, the Leonin Ajani Goldmane, the four Planeswalkers managed to save Pia's life and hold off Tezzeret's forces, causing the Artificer to retreat. Later, the Gatewatch sided with the Resistance in the civil war that erupted between the rebels and the Consulate, and after Tezzeret was decisively defeated by Liliana in direct combat, the Gatewatch discovered that the Esperite Planeswalker had acted under the orders of Nicol Bolas, who had been hiding on the plane of Amonkhet. Now determined more than ever to finish what they had started, and confident that the surprise effect would have been a decisive advantage, Jace pushed to launch an immediate attack on the Ancient Dragon. Nicol Bolas posed perhaps the greatest threat to the multiverse, and whatever he was up to on Amonkhet, he had to be stopped. This was their best chance. The Dragon Planeswalker was definitely stronger than any of them. Its power was as old as time itself. Taken individually, they would never stand a chance against him. Right now, though, Bolas was weak. The Great Dragon had yet not fully recovered from the failure on Alara. Maybe, if they all attacked him at once without waiting any longer, they really might have had a chance to defeat him. The other members agreed with Jace, and together, they all walked to Amonkhet. Arriving on Amonkhet, the Gatewatch were at first overwhelmed by the local fauna and undead hosts that populated the plain. After various vicissitudes, the walkers managed to reach unscathed Naktamun, the capital city of the plain. There, Jace and Liliana were able to discover the involvement of the archdemon Razaketh, as well as the truth behind the creation of the Anointed, the mummified slaves used by the people of Amonkhet and created from the bodies of those who, in life, had failed to pass the trials of the five gods. The walkers barely had time to reflect on the significance of their discovery that the hour of revelation crashed upon the plain of Amonkhet. In a few moments, the gate to the afterlife opened. The the archdemon of death descended amongst the inhabitants of Amonkhet, the river Luxa turned to blood, and the great plan of Nicol Bolas was finally set into motion. In the general confusion, Jace and the remaining Gatewatch members found Liliana moments before the necromancer was devoured by Razaketh. Combining their forces, the Planeswalkers managed to distract the foul beast, and Liliana was able to land the killing blow. Meanwhile, helplessly watching the chaos and devastation that Bolas's beloved Eternals were wreaking upon Amonkhet, the Gatewatch knew the time had come to launch their attack. This was their chance to save Amonkhet, its people, and the entire multiverse from the clutches of Bolas. But things didn't go that way. In a fit of courage and resolve, the valiant Gatewatch hurled himself at the ancient dragon as one. Presumptuously, Jace was the first to lash out at Bolas. The mentalist attempted in vain to penetrate the dragon's mental defenses, only to find them disturbingly similar to those of another primal being he had previously encountered. Before he could even consider what this might mean, Jace heard the dragon's deep, menacing voice taunt him inside his head. How had he dared? A pathetic, useless, weakling little human trying to look beyond what his dull mind could have ever comprehended. With what arrogance and impudence did he think his mind could bear the vastness of so much knowledge? Very well then. If that was what this insignificant being wanted, he would be satisfied. Nicol Bolas opened his mind keep just enough for Jace to slip into it and find himself trapped in endless, rich darkness. The little man's mind was crushed in an instant by the unspeakable weight of what he saw, and Jace had to instinctively flee through the blind eternities to avoid mental death, leaving the fates of his comrades behind. The poor mentalist traveled aimlessly for a long time between the folds of existence and the numerous realities hidden behind the blind eternities, dragged by the survival instinct that ordered him to save himself above all else, to keep getting away just a little further, to forget. And so he did. Jace forgot. He lost every memory of his fight with Bolas and his companions, whose life had remained hanging by a thread. He lost memory of his role as guarantor of the Guild Pact and of Ravnica, and his solemn oath to defend the multiverse. He lost memory of himself and that of his name. Only then, when he was reduced to a little more than an empty shell, devoid of any memory or awareness, did Jace land on a deserted island on the plain of Ixalan, oblivious to everything and frightened like a child marooned in an unknown place by people that they do not remember. But Jace, though devoid of memories, had remained stubborn. He instinctively tried to planeswalk away, but to no avail. Something, or someone, would prevent him from leaving through the same blind eternities from whence he'd come. The need he felt to leave that alien place, however, was too strong to be able to worry about his own safety. The unsuspecting mentalist built a raft and braved the baleful waters of the oceans before him. At the same time, a pirate vessel captain navigated much more skillfully in these same troubled waters. She was the Gorgon planeswalker Rashka of the Golgari Guild, sent on a task of the utmost secrecy and importance from her master. The sky had finally cleared up. These had been difficult days. The storms had given no respite to the Gorgon and her crew. For 5 days and nights, the howling winds and the endless storms had threatened to sink their own vessel, the only home they had in an otherwise unfriendly expanse of endless water. But in the end, as always, Rashka came through unscathed. She was a survivor after all, and if she had resisted the abuses of her captors when she was little more than a child, thunder and lightning certainly would not have stopped her. It was in that very moment, in the soft reddish light of the sunset that Rashka spied the body of a young man passed out on the remains of a careless raft, now adrift. Who was this fool? It did not matter. If she hadn't intervened, they would have soon become food for fish. Besides, maybe this young man had some riches with him. It was worth fishing him out, taking what he possessed and throwing it back to his fate. And so Rashka did. The Gorgon ordered her subordinates to fish the handsome young man from the seductive depths of the sea. And as soon as he was hoisted aboard, Rashka realized what she had done. Jace Beleren, the living guildpact of Ravnica, was laying helpless on her dock, at her very feet. The Golgari champion could have handed his life right away, disposing of a huge potential opponent, but something stopped her. There was an aura of innocence about the wizard. Rashka could feel it. Also, Jace was completely helpless at the moment, unable to fight back. Rashka was a trained, unscrupulous assassin, but she didn't usually kill those who couldn't defend themselves. So, the Gorgon resolved to wait for Jace to wake up before making any further decisions about what to do. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks. Jace awoke, and Rashka learned of his amnesia. An unsuspecting Jace wanted to join the crew to repay his savior, and Rashka decided to spare him. The two became close, and soon they fell in love. For months, Jace actively participated in Rashka's raids as a member of her crew until one day the two arrived at Orazca, the fabled golden city hidden in the deep unexplored jungles of Ixalan and the original destination of the Gorgon. There, the two were shipwrecked and Jace fell into the depths of the sea beneath the city. The shock of the near-death experience was strong enough to bring back every last one of Jace's lost memories, and to Rashka's horror, Jace remembered everything. He remembered his childhood on Rin, Almoret, Ravnica, the Eldrazi, the Gatewatch, Liliana. Everything. All except his last fight with Bolas on Amonkhet. The trauma was still too strong. He also remembered Rashka, who she was, and what she had done, and most importantly, what he thought of her. But the Jace of his memories was a different one. A Jace who hadn't really known her. This Jace was different. Unable to despise the Gorgon again, Jace decided to forgive her for their past grievances and trust her. Together, the two journeyed deep into Orazca, into the heart of the Golden City, where they clashed with Azor First, the Supreme Judge, former Perun of the Azorius Senate on Ravnica, and last guardian to the Immortal Sun on Ixalan. The Immortal Sun was a legendary artifact hidden from time immemorial in the heart of Ixalan, whose primary role was to prevent any planeswalkers who had come to Ixalan from leaving the plane. And that was exactly why Jace's attempts to leave that accursed plane had borne no fruit. Furthermore, if activated, the Immortal Sun was able to generate the same immense heat that is found in the heart of stars, and to the being who had climbed on it, it would have granted unspeakable, godlike powers. Jace was able to defeat Azor First in a direct mental combat, during which the wizard was also able to peer into the Sphinx's mind. What Jace saw were bits of past plans Azor and Ugin hatched against Nicol Bolas, but which never came to fruition. But what Jace saw were also the reasons that had pushed the two ancient beings to hatch such a plan. What Jace saw were experts from Nicol Bolas' master plan, and what the power-hungry Elder Dragon had in store for Ravnica. An invasion, the largest invasion the multiverse had ever seen. And during this invasion, an unspecified ritual, which would restore what Bolas had always considered his birthright, a state of godhood. Immediately, Jace told Rashka what he had witnessed, and she, putting her affection for the mentalist in front of her own safety, decided to trust him fully, and reveal the truth about her master and what her true task on Ixalan was. Rashka had been sent by Nicol Bolas himself to retrieve the immortal sun in exchange for the guild mastery of the Golgari swarm on Ravnica. She knew nothing, however, of what Bolas intended to do with the artifact. She too had been deceived, and now she wanted to help. Knowing that Bolas would scan her memories to ensure her loyalty upon her return, Rashka asked Jace to temporarily erase all memories of their encounter to maintain the secrecy of their partnership. This would allow Bolas to continue to trust the Gorgon so that she could betray him when the time was right. Reluctantly, Jace agreed and sealed away parts of her memories. And just like that, Gorgon forgot the tenderness that united them. And the two, once again strangers and enemies, took different paths. Rashka returned victorious to her master, eager to redeem her prize, while Jace rushed to rally his comrades as well as the other guild leaders in order to prepare Ravnica's defenses for the last great battle that awaited them. Jace Beleren emerged out of his usual crisscross pattern of blue lines connecting the blind eternities to his rooms on Ravnica. The air seemed immediately familiar to him. It was the smell of home. There was something different though. A nefarious presence oppressed the majestic plain-white city. A feeling of loss, despair, and death. As Jace stepped out into the fresh air, his anguish grew stronger. Unnatural golden lines ran across the sturdy bars of an endless cage across the sky above Ravnica. A terrible realization dawned on Jace's mind. He had arrived too late. The immortal sun had already been activated. Bolas's plan was already set into motion and there was no escape. No one could ever leave Ravnica now. Like Jace, countless other planeswalkers soon made their way to the same plane, drawn by the magical vibrations given off by the interplanar beacon. And, as Jace had already experienced on Ixalan, they became inexorably trapped like caged rats, victims of the ancient magic of the immortal sun wielded by its new master, Nicol Bolas himself. But this was only the beginning. Soon, the ancient dragon's master plan was set truly into motion in all its magnificence. Bolas's dread horde of Eternals, led by none other than the necromantic planeswalker Liliana Vess, was ready to invade the plane of Ravnica, killing every last man, woman, and child who had stood up against them. The War of the Spark had begun. A planar bridge was opened in the chamber of the Guild Pact, altering and corrupting the magic of the ley lines that were the foundation of the Guild Pact's magic itself. For this reason, Jace lost his powers as the living Guild Pact and, along with the other planeswalkers and the Ravnican resistance, he fought with all his might against Bolas's Eternals. During the bloody battle that followed, Jace was instrumental in driving back Bolas's tireless armies. At one point, and with quite a few second thoughts and mixed feelings about it, Jace went so far as to volunteer alongside with Jaya, Vivian, and Teferi to make an attempt on the life of Liliana, who had been forced by Bolas to lead his legions of Eternals in the siege. The four planeswalkers did their best, but in the instant before they could deliver the final blow, Nicol Bolas himself stepped in and saved the life of his most precious general. After weeks of siege, the foul stench of sweat mixed with blood was now indistinguishable from any other on the battlefield. Even those to whom death was nothing new were challenged by mutilated and lifeless bodies crushed by rubble or strewn across the streets. One day, Jace was defending an outpost crucial to the tide of battle. The situation was grim. The Eternals knew no weariness, pain, nor fear. They were war machines designed for a single purpose: to destroy Ravnica and bring an end to the world of man. Jace was fighting a handful of Eternals when he suddenly saw her. Sinuous and elegant, Rashka danced across the battlefield, leaving a trail of bodies as she passed. Her delicate serpentine air seemed to float in the air in defiance of all laws of physics. Her arms moved swiftly, slicing through the flesh of her enemies, and where sharp blades failed to reach, the Gorgon's deadly gaze made up for her. Jace was mesmerized. Like a child observing for the first time a wonder he is both frightened and utterly fascinated by. As time began to flow around him again, the mentalist made his way towards the wondrous creature. The two were reunited at last, Jace trying in vain to reconstitute the Gorgon's memories, which had already been taken care of by a Golgari telepath. In that moment, Rashka opened up to Jace. She confessed her guilt in falling victim to the vengeance Bolas had cunningly offered to quench. But she understood now. She wasn't the same Rashka anymore. She had changed, and she desperately wanted Jace to understand that. She desperately wanted him to feel the same fire that she felt burning inside of her. But Jace did not need to be convinced. At that moment, the mentalist would have been willing to forgive her anything. And so he did, just before promising her that once Bolas was defeated, they would finally be together. In the final stages of the conflict, Jace witnessed Gideon sacrifice his own life to save that of Liliana, who had meanwhile finally rebelled against Bolas, agreeing to sacrifice her own life to launch the last great offensive which resulted in the defeat of Nicol Bolas. Later, Jace was contacted telepathically by Ugin and agreed to create a plain white illusion that hid the presence of the spirit dragon who had come to recover his twin brother's body to lead him to the meditation realm, making everybody believe that Bolas's body had instead disintegrated at the end of the battle. Subsequently, the mentalist ordered Saheeli Rai to disable the immortal sun so as to allow the concealed Ugin to live Ravnica with his brother's body, and Liliana, still found guilty of driving the Dread Horde and therefore sentenced to death, to escape Ravnica before being captured. Finally, Jace attended the plain white celebration that followed the victory of the Ravnican forces, where he was reunited with Rashka and where the two were able to exchange a long overdue kiss. If only that moment could have lasted forever. And even if at first Jace and Rashka consumed their passionate love, in the months that followed, the two drifted apart again. Complicit in this were multiple reasons. Rashka continued to lie and to put the interests of her guild in front of her lover, while Jace probably never managed to stop having feelings towards Liliana. And so, the two took different paths again, like stars that came together for a fleeting instant and whose orbits now brought them light years away from each other once again. Thus, Jace and Rashka parted ways, knowing, perhaps in their hearts, that their separation was temporary, that sooner or later their love would be too strong to resist, that this, after all, was only a period which would, sooner or later, result in their reapproachment. If only they knew how wrong they were. Because Jace and Rashka would never meet again, and this would be their last time together. In the months after Bolas's defeat and at Nissa's request, Jace became involved in Zendikar affairs and in the quest for the lithoform core shared, although for very different reasons, by the elf Nissa and the lithomancer Nahiri. The lithoform was a gem as powerful as it was dangerous, one that Nahiri planned to use to restore Zendikar to its former glory, to the massive majestic cities lost with the arrival of the Eldrazi, where nature was held in check and phenomena like the Royal did not exist. All of this, however, would inevitably come at the expense of the flora and fauna that had proliferated in this new world. And for this reason, Nissa could not allow that. After a series of vicissitudes and misunderstandings that led Jace to ally first with Nissa, later with Nahiri, and then again with Nissa in the search for the lithoform core, Jace witnessed Nissa use the artifact's power to heal Zendikar and undo the damage to the plane, restoring it to something stronger than it had ever been, even before the Eldrazi had walked on it. Though deep scars still marred its surface, they were no longer Zendikar's defining feature. After millennia, the plane finally had found its peace. But not Jace, who lost yet another friend that day in Nissa as she didn't forgive his betrayal in favor of Nahiri. The mentalist watched with regret and sadness as the elf faded into the depths of the blind eternities, hoping that soon he wouldn't be able to regain her trust. Jace's adventures on Zendikar had just ended when another threat, far darker and more frightening, slowly took shape in a distant metallic plane. The balance of the 5 praetors had been broken on New Phyrexia. Elesh Norn had been crowned Mother of the Machines and was preparing to infect the entire multiverse with Phyrexia. Phyrexia is a viral civilization that reproduced by infecting other living beings and turning them into brand new Phyrexians through a process called completion. Completion is initiated via infecting the victim with a substance called glistening oil, which prompts biological and personality shifts in the subject's body and mind, leading them to crave the splendor and perfection of Phyrexia. The infection triggered by the oil is what we call Phyrexia. Once the victim's mind has been taken, they voluntarily submit to the last step of completion, which is surgery. There, their bodies are augmented through mechanical installation and monstrous modifications to achieve a form of twisted perfection. Only those who survive this unspeakable suffering become blessed by the glory of Phyrexia. In addition to that, a new module recently developed by the Blue Praetor Jingitaxias has made possible what was once unthinkable: the completion of Planeswalkers. Jace Beleren, a former Living Guildpact and founding member of the Gatewatch, had taken an oath. The Mentalist could never stand by and watch as the entire multiverse fell to its knees in the face of Nor's sick fanaticism. Thus, the wizard took it upon himself to prepare the defenses of Ravnica against the threat imposed by New Phyrexia, gathering the other Gatewatch and organizing the assault on the corrupted world of Elesh Norn. The idea behind their plan was to launch a massive attack on New Phyrexia, cutting their way through the different layers of the corrupted plane all the way down to its core. There, Jace would detonate the filigree Silex to destroy the Realmbreaker, a twisted and corrupted version of Kaldheim's Word Tree through which Elesh Norn planned to complete each and every other plane across the multiverse. By doing so, Jace would probably have had to sacrifice his life, but he would also have saved the entire world, ending the rotten Phyrexian seed once and for all. Again, however, nothing went as planned. The Mother of the Machines had outsmarted them all, and she had anticipated their every move. A planar shield had been placed in defense of New Phyrexia and had interfered with the arrival of the Planeswalkers who were part of Jace's strike team. As a result of this, the various members found themselves scattered across the plane in various groups, unaware of their position and that of their comrades. The mind link established by Jace before setting off, and which allowed him to connect mentally with his companions, had also been severed. After some initial difficulties which also led to the infection of Nahiri, a good part of the assault team managed to reunite in the Furnace Layer, where they also met Koth, the leader of the Mirrodin resistance on the plane. Together, the Planeswalkers set out to dive deep into the depths of New Phyrexia in an attempt to thwart Norn's insane plan. The first obstacle to overcome would be the Dross Pits, black marshes covered with green corrosive gas known as necrogen, which constituted the sixth sphere of New Phyrexia. Fortunately, Elspeth provided the Planeswalkers with a dose of Halo, which was capable of temporarily repel any infections from outside agents. However, what the Planeswalker did not know is that the dose of Halo would also partially restore the mind link that Jace had established with the other missing Planeswalkers. The Blue Wizard had just finished ingesting the mysterious substance contained in the bottle passed to him by Elspeth when he fell backwards in excruciating pain and uncontrollable convulsions. After endless moments of general panic, Jace regained consciousness, sat down, and spoke only a few words. "She is in pain. She needs me." "Who's she?" asked Tyver. Jace's reply came quick, sharp as a blade. "Rashka. She made it down here, and she's alone, and she is scared." The words of his friends were useless. There was no reason to hear for Jace. Rashka was suffering, perhaps even dying. He had to save her, or at least he had to try. Uncaring of the original task that had led them to that foul place, Jace abandoned the group and headed towards the direction from which he'd heard the cries of despair of his lover. The others, because Jace carried the Silex with him, had to follow. Eventually, they found Rashka in Sheoldred's Colosseum, badly wounded with obvious signs of infection. Nonetheless, she was fighting off hordes of Phyrexians who were assailing her from all sides. Recognizing that she was already lost, and there was no point in jeopardizing the entire mission to try in vain to save her life, the other Planeswalkers decided to leave Rashka to her fate with or without Jace's approval. Kaya used her phasing magic to steal the Silex from Jace, and the group fled the Colosseum before being overwhelmed. All but one. As illogical as it was, Jace couldn't leave Rashka there. Instead, he used his magic to slow time around them, opening a space in the mind of his lover where the couple could have taken refuge for a few years of diluted time during the last few seconds that remained on the outside. Fear crept in their hearts. It was indeed over, but at last, they would be together. At least, there was time for one last kiss. Even for just a moment, they could forget everything that was on the outside. But a moment was all that Rashka needed.
For the glory of new Phyrexia,
She whispered, right before stabbing Jace with her barbed scorpion-like tail, infecting him with fears as well. Jace had been tricked. All had been a trap. Rashka was long dead, and the being that was now before him was nothing more than a monster wearing the body of his beloved. All had been for nothing. And now, Jace was lost too. Very soon, he would have been too claimed by Phyrexia. Jace's companions, meanwhile, managed, also thanks to Nahiri's sacrifice, to save themselves from the Sheoldred's Colosseum and reach the lower level of New Phyrexia, the Fair Basilica, bringing themselves one step closer to their final goal. It was at that moment that an infected and doomed Jace joined them and offered, due to his condition, to personally detonate the Silex in the seed core of New Phyrexia. The Mentalist, who surprisingly was still himself, was convinced that he could fend off the corruption that, in the meantime, was making its way through its veins. He just needed a little time, but that little time could have saved everyone. By sacrificing himself, he would make sense of Rashka's loss, and what little time he had left would have had some value. He had to do it. It had to be him. As the group got closer to the Sid core, the infection progressed inexorably, and Jace had to fight harder and harder to counter its fascinating whisperings. Soon, the progress of the infection was clearly visible even externally. The Mentalist's right arm became fully mechanized. Small fragments of metal began to surface on his face, and mechanized tendrils tipped with mechanical blue eyes began to sprout from his body. Traveling through the Mycosynth Gardens, the group eventually reached the seed core and railbreaker within it, just as the massive interplanar tree was establishing its connections to other planes across the multiverse. Jace prepared to detonate the Silex as had been planned, but Kaya, incredibly, resisted. The Planeswalker from Tolvada was in fact afraid that the explosion and effective destruction of New Phyrexia and the Realm Breaker could also affect those planes of the multiverse to which the invasion tree had already been connected. To be fair, Jace had already considered this possibility. It wasn't entirely crazy to think that the eventual disappearance of the Realm Breaker would also entail the disappearance of all the planes already connected to its rotor interplanar branches. Jace knew that was a lot more than just a possibility. But honestly, he didn't care. If that meant the end of New Phyrexia, there was no price he wasn't willing to pay. He had to avenge Rashka at any cost. Besides, he had nothing left to lose. Heedless of Kaya's warnings, the great blue wizard poured into the golden cup of destruction all of his sorrow, His fury, the pain with which Mirrodin was imbued, his regrets, and his lost love for Rashka. Then, determined more than ever to sacrifice everything he knew for the greater good, Jace spoke the magical words necessary to complete the ritual. However, just before the apocalyptic might of the Silex was unleashed, Elspeth, who had stayed behind to counter a completed version of her dearest friend Ajani Golmain, burst into the chamber's door and impaled Jace with her halo-infused blade. After that, the valiant warrior grabbed the Silex and disappeared into the depths of the Blind Eternities, just as the fabled artifact began to unleash its uncontrollable, destructive power. A few seconds later, under the terrified and pained eyes of Kaito, Kaya, and Tyvar, Elesh Norn entered the Seed Core chamber. In that same instant, Jace's lifeless body rose again, completing the corruption process and becoming an integral part of the Flesh Singularity. Later, when the invasion was about to begin and Norn was giving out orders to her completed planeswalkers regarding the planes designated for the great invasion of Phyrexia, Jace left before even receiving his assignment. In that instance, Norn assumed that, given his unparalleled telepathic talents, the completed perfected mind was already aware of the goal that his mother would entrust him with. However, its real destination is still unknown. Later, a completed Rashka was struck by Ral Zarek's hemelectric switch while leading the Phyrexian invasion of the plane of Ravnica. The high-frequency sonic waves transmitted by Ral's beam disintegrated the glistening oil present inside the Gorgon's body, freeing her from the Phyrexian influence. At that moment, Rashka had a vision of Jace. However, whether this vision was the result of mere delusion, a memory, or a real telepathic projection of her loved one still remains unknown. Hello you guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of Planeswalkers 101 featuring Jace Beleren. This episode was really a challenging one. It definitely took much more time than I had expected, but I'm glad I finally managed to finish and deliver it to you guys. So once again, I'd like to remind you that this video was entirely sponsored and made possible by those of you who have decided to support me through my Patreon page, The Octopus Lair. If you want to support us directly, that's the best way to do so. So thank you all so much if you already decided to join us, and if you didn't, go have a look and see if that can be of any interest to you. A very special thanks goes to Gavin, who's decided to support us with the highest tier of subscription on Patreon. So thank you so much for the immense trust and invaluable support you're giving to our channel. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe, like, and share. My name is Octopus, and I will see you in the next one.